A new face, Stuart. Not a new face for me, but a new face for the channel. So what are we going to do today? We had our first meeting of the Philosophy of Freedom group with lots of new people attending, which is really heartening to see on Matt's channel, where it is now called Urphänomen, separate channel from his original Footnotes to Plato. And one of the questions that Stuart asked in the group was about what even is intuition, and Stuart and I exchanged a couple of messages on Skype, and then decided, well, why not have a conversation and see if we can create some clarity around that by putting our heads together, and hopefully other people can learn from the process if we actually say anything of any sense. I don't know. We'll see. So what I thought I'd do is I'll pose this question and see where it takes us. So with the Philosophy of Freedom, when we get to chapter 3, we'll start talking about the exceptional state and this, so we won't go deeply into that. But one of the ways you can describe it is it's the process of thinking about the activity of thinking itself. It's like studying. It's like it's like a scientific investigation. When you do a scientific experiment, what you do is you create an experiment, you perform the experiment, you make your observations, and then you see what the data is telling you. And in to a certain extent, the exceptional state is no different from that, except what you're observing is not the content of your thoughts so much as this activity that's driving them the whole time. And as you enter more deeply into this activity of thinking about thinking, you realize that you're trying to describe an anatomy or a geography of what thinking is, which leads to new questions that we might not have been interested in before, or might not have considered important, but all of a sudden they appear with a lot more urgency, and that's what I think is going on here with Stuart's question. So if we tackle the first one, or have a go at thinking around the first one, thinking and intuition, are they the same thing? What do you think? Either Stuart or Jeff, I don't mind. What do you think, guys?
I would begin with Spinoza, of all people, where he describes he recapitulates the modes of perception, which he has hitherto employed for affirming or denying anything with certainty. It begins with hearsay. So, for example, yeah, I pretty much know I was born on a certain day, but I wasn't there when it happened, and so on. And going through a couple other stages. The final stage, the fourth one, which he does refer to explicitly as intuition, which I always.
Stuart, give us the in between bits as well. So hearsay is the first stage that he's talking about. Have you got the other two there?
All right. Yeah, I actually copied it up so I'd have it just in case. So they can be reduced to 4, and there's a pretty good correspondence with Plato, which is okay. The first one would be perception arising from hearsay or from some sign, which everyone may name as he pleases. I try to point out to people that if you think about it, 95% of what you think you know is hearsay. Second one would be perception arising from mere, well, let me get this. Perception arising from mere experience, that is, from experience not yet classified by the intellect, and only so called because the given event has happened to take place, and we have no contradictory fact to set against it, so that it therefore remains unassailed in our minds. That certainly, just looking around at my environment would be doing that. And it seems to me that level might correspond to Barfield's the level of figuration, something like that, as opposed to. And then the third one is perception arising when the essence of one thing is inferred from another thing, but not adequately. This comes when from some effect we gather its cause, or when it is inferred from some general proposition that some property is always present. So there's a lot of that goes on in science. But fourth, and this is one, and he explicitly describes it as intuition. Lastly, there is the perception arising when a thing is perceived solely through its essence or through the knowledge of its proximate cause. So, and then he gives an example of determining ratios at in the marketplace, and shows how you could have 4 different ways of approaching it. At the lowest level, the merchant was told how to do this sort of thing, and that works. What the heck, and so on. And then you get to the fourth one where you can just see. There's nothing between you and the seeing of it, the understanding of it, I would say.
You've pervaded it with your own understanding. Is that what you mean?
Pardon me?
You've pervaded it with your own understanding.
I'm happy with that way of putting it. Yeah. That's, for example, so that 4 is to 6 is 2 is to 3. We can still see that. And by the way, as a consequence of that, most calculation, the individual steps may have some level of intuition, but you can't intuit 700. According to that, I would say it's impossible to intuit, well, for most people anyway, impossible to intuit 739 times 847. And it may even be that people who can do that calculation really can't intuit it. They just have this facility for computations. And so there's some intuition going on there within the computation, but they're not really seeing that fact, that mathematical fact per se. The way we can see, for example, that 1 and 1 are 2, 1 and 2 are 3. It's like, and so partly, so it's worth noting, I think, that because if I can't see directly that 1 and 1 are 2, I can't do math at all. and okay, so I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Do you want to jump in there, Jeff?
Hey, Stuart, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Jeff. Thank you. How are you doing?
Good. Good. Who was that you were referring to? The 4.
Spinoza.
Spinoza. Okay. So first, I would observe that that is intuition in relationship to perception, not in relationship to thinking. And so, because the first question is, are thinking and intuition the same thing? Right? Is that what we're at? That's the question. So that's interesting, and I think that I lots of thoughts came out of that. So I think I'll just take this and say there's so many ways to look at what intuition is, and so here is a good question. If intuition is to thinking as observation is to perception, then intuition is related to thinking, but not the same thing, but perhaps part of the same. It leaves open that it's part of the same organism, but it also suggests that thinking is that phrase, if it's true, that intuition is to thinking as observation is to perception, suggests that intuition is that which is perceptual in thinking. That's all I would have to say about that question at this moment.
Okay. I'm going to add a couple of thoughts. One of the things I thought you brought up that was interesting there, Stuart, which I think is important to create clarity on, is the essence. You talked about essence there, and when we try to understand what a concept is, so if we look at Aristotle's definition of a concept, it's just like the difference between, it's like what is essential to an object and what is non-essential to it. Okay, so let's unpack that with a real example. So I could ask you to define a wolf, or define a table, or define anything. And as soon as you start opening your mouth, rather than going through this, it's like as an example. If you question it, then we can go through it. But I think you'll follow. So if I ask you to define the essential aspects of wolf or table, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to pick out individual things, but you will actually never be able, through language, to arrive at what the essence of a wolf is. However, you never have any problem intuiting what a wolf is, intuiting what a table is. There is it's got something to do with the essential nature of things, and I think it's really important to have that in the background when we're trying to what is a concept. It is something that is actually, Steiner talks about it later in the book. He says language, words are only indications that we have concepts. They are not concepts in themselves. And the more we look at language and understand how it works, the more obvious it becomes to us, or the reality of the statement becomes even clearer to us. Another point that I think is coming up here is intuition. I think of intuition in a way when these concepts suddenly alight in our consciousness. Again, let's think about it like a more concrete example, like Archimedes and his Eureka movement. It's like jumping in the bath and realizing all the principles that are involved there. It's this intuitive. I'm sorry, Howard. It's this intuitive. I'm using the word to describe a word itself. That's not going to help, is it? At a certain sense, there's a fundamental recognition that here it's something essential, something that escaped my mind before, my thinking. It's or if you like, it's like unconnected dots in my conceptual realm. They suddenly find it's like a unifying pattern where for example, the bathtub and the water displacement and his needs to create a boat for was it the King of Alexandria or something like that at the time, that these disparate ideas are connected in a whole, and this when what I think I understanding, let's put it more carefully. My understanding of what Steiner means with intuitive thinking is this experience of I've been battling with a question. It's like I've got these disparate elements in my thinking, it might be even disparate concepts, and then all of a sudden it's given to me, or perhaps it's birthed within me, a recognition that how all of these are interrelated. It's a form of if we were talking about religious practice, we might talk about revelation, but it's definitely this sense that I've created the situation in myself in which the intuition can present itself to me, but it's not something that I have directly created myself. It's been intuited in me, and I recognize its value. And then, so if that's my definition, if that's my current understanding of what intuition and what I think Steiner means by intuition, it's like a joining together of the dots. Then is the thinking? I think the thinking is something very different from that. It's the ability to understand why the dots are connected. Perhaps it's, but at the same time, that this intuition happens in the realm of thinking, which I think might lead us to one of Stuart's favorite questions, consciousness. Where's all this happening? I don't know, is there anything that I said or another person has said here to like taking our thinking in a different direction? By the way, Jeff, I particularly like your bit about observation is to thinking as perception is to...
Intuition is to thinking as observation is to perception.
As observation is to perception.
Yeah. Can I just take that, connect the dots out of the abstract to dots? Because it seems to me what you're describing is pattern recognition. I'm not going to go not going to go very far with that at this moment, but I have an interest in connecting intuition and instinct. But let's just say for now that if maybe to add on to what you're saying or add some texture to what you're saying, is that thinking is the coming into being of patterns alongside the pattern recognition that's occurring, and intuition is the noticing of the noticing of the patterns, so that it's a conscious experience. So it's thinking is a participatory experience. Intuition makes it conscious. Something like that.
When you say thinking is a participatory experience, so go and unpack that a little bit, Jeff.
I mean, it's an unmediated experience of patterns, the patterns of reality. And it's unmediated by rational theorizing or models or abstractions. It in its essence is the essence of that which it's observing, and so is unified with that which is observing. It's not only that thinking comes up with the notions of concept and percept. It is both of them at the same time by virtue of intuition.
Okay.
One of whilst you were saying that, Jeff, the bit on pattern recognition and unpacking that was good. As also thinking that there's something inherently, there's a creativity, something about intuition and creativity in the thinking realm feel inherently the same. That a creative process is happening in me that joins up those dots that I was previously incapable of joining. And I recognize immediately I'm able to connect things that previously I wasn't able to, and that in itself is a creative act, as opposed to, because pattern recognition can sound like as something a little bit passive, and it's far from that. It definitely, my own experiences of it are directly, wow. I mean, so thank you to whatever it is in me, outside me, around me, that put that new higher level idea into my mind. So perhaps you could say intuition is the birthing of a higher level idea. It's like a join the dots idea. Could anybody get behind that, or do you think does that sound ridiculous?
Uh, it seems to me that Steiner's the example that he uses to introduce us to the idea of intuition is our relationship. Never mind the process of thinking for a moment, but our actual immediate contact with the substance, the reality of the concept that we understand. And there's no separation between us. I mean, participation at its max, as far as I can see. And it seems to me, and he says over and over again, by the way, that the process of coming to know things is the same in ordinary consciousness as in the spiritual world. And that's why I mentioned to you in one of my texts to you that is it just a matter of having more perceptions and still applying all the same dynamics of our thinking, but we have we've managed through our exercises and our personal experiments to have a broader perception that puts more things into context, and we can make more of those connections. That he also defines the concept that way, is establishing the connections among things. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it's important to, so I go with the idea that all these things are, I mean, his applying those concepts of intuition, thinking, and inspiration, if we couldn't have some experience of them in ordinary consciousness, it seems to me I wouldn't have any idea what he's talking about. Yeah. And so I see it. I see intuition in relation to thinking, and imagination, and so forth, and also thinking in relation to the higher worlds, in relation as opposed to thinking in relation to the our ordinary experiences. Not one of moving to something different, but a transformation of the very thing. And yeah, I think I'll stop there.
I want to pick up the creative aspect of it, because everything is creation. It is one way to look at that. So what we are participating in is creation. And then if we add just, in everyday life, if we add, if we engage thinking consciously, then we are participating in creation as it's coming into being, while also altering it as a participant that is bringing ourselves into being, at the very least, I would say. There's a mystery as relates to what that impact is in the sort of butterfly effect sense, or the monkeys on the island sense, or the Christ's miracles sense, and why those would have worked, dealing with perception. So yeah, the creative bit is one is one probably important to define what we mean by creation. You know, it's not like creativity and arts and crafts or even a painting, although those are on perhaps a continuum with what is possible with thinking as an unmediated activity.
If it's okay with you, Jeff, I'd like to go back to so come back to observation is to perception as thinking is to intuition. Yeah.
Observation is to perception as intuition is to thinking. So
okay, let's
unpack that.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. So what's the difference between, in our minds, between observation and perception?
Well, observation requires attention, and perception can be done passively. Yet we don't. I mean, there's a lot of things we're perceiving that we don't know we're perceiving, so we're not observing the perception, right? There's a whole complex reality that I have to shut out in order to pay attention to something and observe it. So observation is training the perception.
So it's like looking as opposed to seeing. So perception is looking. Yeah. Do you agree with this, or would you say different?
I think an even better example would be one of the spiritual senses, which is to say, I hear what you're saying because I'm listening, but I could also hear what you're saying without listening to you.
Yeah, exactly. Hearing and listening, looking and seeing. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting in several languages. So there's I won't go there with language. We'll just leave that. So I think that's useful because what it does is it indicates it's like one is a more passive state, a non-participatory state, where so like something is just going on and your senses are your hearing or your sense of hearing or auditory senses or your sense of sight are picking up on things, and that's happening the whole time. But then when consciousness is there, it is also aware of it.
Yeah. Stuart, you're familiar with the 12 senses, Steiner's notion of the 12 senses?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure we have some common language there, because listeners may not know about the 12 senses. And the higher senses, of course, are hearing, tone, concept,
Language.
and I-ness or other. And another way at this is along this perception road that we're going down a little bit here. And this is just that side of the equations, because this is what we're unpacking now, is the observation perception. What are you observing when you observe another's eye? You know, the I-ness, say. Or what are you observing when you observe a concept? What are you attending to? What's there? And same with tone, and same with hearing. Okay, so just to provide that sensorial picture, say, if okay, so I'll ask the question: imagination, inspiration, and intuition are all related, and they are transformed sensory experiences that are no longer that when we were dealing with, sorry, I'm stumbling about here, when we were dealing with hearing and listening is a transformed version of hearing, right? So imagination is a transformed version of seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see with imagination is to even look with greater attention than to just a look, right? So seeing with imagination is what we do all the time in any case, because we wouldn't be able to grasp anything if we didn't have an imagination that grasped it. But it would be an elevation of that imagination into a continuous or a fluid cognitive state. So, and if hearing and tone perhaps are transformed beyond even listening into inspiration, then intuition is transformed perception of I-ness. And I would also say that I'm going out on a limb a little bit, that it's also at its fullness the transformed sense of touch as the companion to the sense of otherness. And this then goes into the differentiation between animals who have instinct and human beings who have intuitions. And I think intuitions are elevated versions of instinct.
So let me vastly simplify what you just said there and bring us back to our first question. So hearing is to listening as thinking is to intuition. That's also what you're saying, in a way, I believe.
Yes, or hearing is to listening as inspiration is to hearing, perhaps, something like that.
I'm trying to tie it back to our...
Yeah.
The reason we brought it up was to try and come back to our question. We've got, are thinking and intuition the same thing? And we're saying, no, they're not. We're saying like observation. So perceiving is to observation as thinking is to intuition. That's what we're saying, according to Steiner. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a reversal, but I'm sure it applies in reverse as well.
But you were bringing in hearing and listening, and I brought in looking and seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, the flavor of the difference is like this participation in the activity. That it's if we're not there with our consciousness, it happens. So if we're not there with our consciousness in looking, we don't see. If we're not there with our consciousness in hearing, we don't listen. And if we're not there with our consciousness in perception, we cannot observe. So this is beginning to feel, I emphasize that, this is beginning to feel like a good way of experiencing the difference between thinking and intuition, because we experience thinking often as we are passive observers of thinking. You know that exercise we did about like around the breakfast table. What were you thinking about at breakfast time this morning? We talked a bit about it in the last video. And if we go back and look at it's like the thoughts of the day or during a certain period of the day, what we find is like they just roll on and roll on and roll on without our active participation. We experience them, we react to them emotionally. We're not there. We're like riding on a train of thoughts. So I start, let's say I'm going to make up something. So like at breakfast time, I start thinking, about, I look at the marmalade pot and I see it's getting a bit empty. So I start thinking about, oh, next time I go shopping, I need to do this. And then it's like in my mind, I'm in the supermarket and I'm wandering around. And then I remember, oh yeah, that reminds me, I saw this guy there 2 weeks ago and I need to meet him. I'm just giving a random example of how our one thought leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And there is a thread throughout all of this, but often we are unaware of this thread until we use our memory to go back and identify, okay, yeah, this thought led to this thought, led to this thought, led to this thought. We're just like riding along on this train. And when intuition happens, is that we are no longer, saying that we're no longer in this passive state of riding along on a train of thought, but this is something different. Do we think that's what we're saying, or am I like mixing in too many? Am I just confusing, muddying the waters by adding in these details?
No, I don't think you're muddying the waters, but I don't think what you're describing is thinking. I think that what you're describing is that you're becoming conscious of some sort of process underlying the things that you call thoughts. So I would just differentiate there that thinking has feeling, willing, and conceptual processing, say, within it. So I guess I would say that what you're describing is potentially thinking. It's thinking in potentia, say.
It's a common experience of thinking. Certainly, you can. That is sort of, people might not have had the same thoughts as I just outlined at the breakfast table, but often how they experience their own thought like will be something similar. One thing leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next. But then where's intuition there? The discerning of the patterns. I think.
Well, intuition is the will inside of thinking, right? I mean, intuition is, again, from a, say, initiatory standpoint, what is intuition that is sustained? It's intuitive thinking. It's achieved intuition so let's go to this a Steinerian picture of initiation. So you for the first step in initiation is imagination, which is somewhat of a passive experience, but it's giving you reality unmediated, like a motion picture of reality, because reality's in flow. So you're able to sort of like on an acid trip, deal with the flow part of things. And that's the astral body viewing into the etheric world, say, that which is coming into formative force all the time, sort of Heraclides' picture of fire. And then you have inspiration, which is a quieting actually of the imaginative process. And then something like the music of silence is speaking to you, just as things are, unmediated reality communicated through something akin to music, or maybe communicating out of that realm which music arises, say, is a newer understanding I have of that. And then then I would imagine your dream life is quite active and has changed quite a bit. And then he describes, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he describes intuition, the achieving of the initiation into intuition, as entering consciously into dreamless sleep. So I'll leave that there, because this is it's another way at this that has a embodied, say, description.
Did you want to add something, Stuart, there? Otherwise, I've got something.
Uh, I, there's a lot of detail that you folks are bringing up that I don't feel myself to be in a position to have judgment, firm judgment, one way or the other. Yeah, there's quite a few things that came up, but the one that just struck me as Jeff was talking is perhaps fancifully, but if I apply my understanding so far of Goethe's approach, which Steiner is trying to amplify into his worldview and his experience and understanding, is this concept of thinking and intuition and imagination and perception. I tend to see them all as forms of understanding. And once you take that step, then you start thinking, well, I do. Start thinking, well, wait a minute. The feelings, attitudes, values especially, in fact, probably fundamentally, I'm not going to present an argument for that, but are involved in our understanding of our place and our experience of the world. And that's why I tend to think of these things as transformations. I'm applying that sort of in specifically with respect to thinking. That intuition itself is it's thinking. It's just this a further development of it, further transformation of. In fact, that guy Alan Howard that I mentioned to you before we started, Angus, says it's not the process of knowledge that changes. It's we who change as we move into the spiritual world. So that's my immediate thought on that subject. But it's understanding just seems like it's what we do. And that relates to the intuitions, animals, and instincts. It seems to me that, I'm inclined to relate those things in the following way. Bees, they look for pollen, and they create what do they call those nests? I'm forgetting at the moment. And they create honey, and they impregnate the queen and all. Yeah. That's just what they do. Well, we ask questions. It's part of our actual. We can't do anything else. We could.
Chapter 1, we're never satisfied with what nature gives us. We always want more.
Well, but notice, not in that negative sense.
That's right.
But in a positive sense, because that's who and what we are. Now, what you make of that, in terms of what the ultimate reality is another question. But that is what we are, and our ability to. I'll just throw out, without saying anything more about it, I'll just throw out the idea of metacognition. I've been fascinated by that idea for quite a while now. When you think about the differences between us, the alleged differences between us and animals, I can't think of anything more precise than the idea that we metacogitate. And which would be, by the way, Barfield's beta thinking, as opposed to either figurative thinking or alpha thinking. And it strikes me that this beta thinking or metacognitive which is largely evaluative, is the distinguishing mark. how that relates to whatever else you guys are saying.
I'm going to come back to, I think you said something that struck a chord in me, Jeff, earlier. The will nature of intuition. When I've done these observation of thinking exercise before, that's one of the things that comes through. It's like there was an intent. So I wrote this down because it was like quite a strong experience I had probably about 6 or so months ago. But I was trying to like wrap my head around this exceptional state. So I'd been reading Philosophy of Freedom, no doubt, or perhaps it was Prokofiev. And I went out for a walk in the forest. And I had to like this chain of thought. So it was a walk. I was probably after I'd walked about 20 minutes. It's like a series of thoughts developed themselves in me. So like one led to the next, led to the next, led to the next, led to the next. And then I came to this point down by the lake. And I remember I looked at the birds like flying towards me. And then I reviewed sort of like the thinking that had happened. So like for the past 20 minutes, it's like a bit like watching a film. And I saw an intent there. I saw there was an intent. I had no idea about that intent when I started off my walk, but it was quite clear that there was an intent moving my thinking along. And then I was able, by like letting those thoughts pass through my memory again, then being able to intuit the will, what it was trying to wake me up to there, although I had no conscious awareness of it before. So I think it's really, I think you personally, I think you said something hugely significant here. So like intuition is linked to like the will aspect of thinking, and that's what we're unconscious of until we start doing these exercises. I'm not saying that's all intuition is, but I think you've helped me recognize that, yeah, this is another essential part, or one of those things that you discover once you start thinking about thinking. There's a subconscious will there going on in our thinking life. It's a little bit like the director of the film has his intent in the film. She wants you to sort of have certain emotions during that film, and so like to have certain thoughts, and it'll all the scenography and the dialogues will be sort of like directed to create those impressions that want to be created. And something similar can be seen to be going on in our thought life. So the thinking is a manifestation of a deeper will impulse. And that's like somehow, that's very different from the intuition I was describing before as a creative act, as like as an insight, as pattern recognition. But I think it's also something important that you've picked out there.
It might be helpful to move into this second question a little bit. It seems to be a natural place to do that. That is thinking just a remembering? And my first response to that question is, well, what do you mean by remembering?
Yeah.
And that's a hard one to hold on to a little bit, because seems to me there's different kinds of remembering. There's a remembering of past activities, and even that is not what it seems to be. It's not, as X says in the chat. It's not storage. It's memory memory itself is a living process.
It's a recreation of a past event,
which is a present process. It's more
Exactly.
about it's about the present event. And as Plato said, as I've mentioned this before, when Plato said all knowledge is a kind of remembering, that's what he meant. I think is actually that we're not talking about remembering in the sense of the past. We're talking about a recognition of how things are coming into being now and how they're connected, probably
To,
to the heritage of their um, um, uh, maybe existence outside of time, perhaps, or even within time.
yeah.
If a new idea is never an idea that is not made out of all of the ideas that came before, say something like that.
I'm going to have to. So I don't have enough ancient Greek to be able to begin to look at that etymologically, but I know a couple of people who've got enough knowledge in that direction. So one of the first questions I'm going to be asking them is tell me about the Greek word for to remember. I was actually listening to a chat, not a chat, a conference. I was telling Stuart about it earlier before we started, by a guy called Pietro Archiati, and he was actually in on exactly this theme. He's sort of in English we have to recall, to remember, to remind. These are all the reflections like a certain nuances of thinking. So in Italian, he contrasts Italian word for to remember, or some of the words, and the German word, and it's might be useful as like a description going on. So they were talking about ricordare, which literally means to bring into the heart again. So cordare is the cord is the cuore is the heart. Then you've got another word which is rammentare, which means just like to bring into the mind again. And there was also a third one, but he contrasts that with the German, which is erinnern, sich erinnern an etwas. And this innen means like interior, inside, and it means to bring inside again. And these are all like language, so like battling, so like in battling to sort of describe how do we experience this thing where we're able to like recreate something that's happened in the past, because it's also one of the ways in which we transcend the animal kingdom, this ability to create perceptions in ourselves, or to create perceptions, to create perceptions in ourselves that aren't there outside. And we can be in control of that process as well. So the world, we've got an interior life. An animal has an interior life, but there's no indication that it's able to select to choose a content for its mind. But that's exactly what we can do with memory if we choose to do so. Often it happens involuntarily. That's like extreme cases of what's the post-traumatic syndrome, PTS. There's like there extreme states, so where it can happen involuntarily, but it's something that's very real to the human psyche, part of this region of the soul that we're trying to shed a little bit more light on.
Yeah, I have a question about thinking and remembering. I do think, again, the difference that you pointed to, but initially I want to mention that the difference you seem to be pointing to there between us and animals, again, seems to me to point to our metacognitive abilities that I don't think either no animals have, or maybe some animals have some such meager ability in that way. But the problem I'm having with remembering and thinking, and I don't know how this exactly relates to the things you've been mentioning, but I'm inclined to say that I can remember events in my life. I can't remember thinking in my life. And what I mean by that, as best as I can say it now, is that to remember an event, I don't have to be part of that event again. I mean, however memory works and so on, leaving all that aside, all the metaphysics of it aside, I don't have to engage in that event. I don't have to participate in that event. I can remember the event as something that happened without engaging in it. But when it comes to something, a thought that I had, I can't just imagine the event of having a thought. I actually have to think it again. It seems to me. And then I can say, oh yeah, I remember I thought that before. But I can't even make that latter statement unless I have thought it through myself originally. And that, that relates to, I think, some things Steiner says, that real thinking is a creative process in the moment, always. And that's how I relate that to myself. Again, however it may have fit in with what you were saying. Angus was another question.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's just beautiful. It's and it's undisputable. It makes me think of a lot of things, like people who play music, who make the music so much their own that they it's no longer something that they're abstractly in relationship with. They're inside the music and, in a sense, recomposing it. Yeah, and I think as thinking people, we are recomposing the world at the very least. Right. And I also take that second question, and sort of turn it a little bit and say, is instinct just a remembering? Because I think there's an equatable reality that has intuitive thinking in relationship to instinct as a consilient reality, right? So I think of intuition and instinct is on the same continuum. Instinct is something that happens in the physiological organization. It rises to the point to the level of sentience, and you can it's attributable to all at least all animal behaviors. And so the idea that so evolutionary biologists would say that intuition then is real, but it's an epiphenomena of instinct, say. And I would say that that's one picture, and another picture would be that that intuition is the already existent tendency in nature as that which creates itself, independent of independent, and instinct then becomes the habitually learned response that then goes into the specialization of species, say. And we have both.
Exactly.
But animals don't have intuition.
And this leads my thinking directly into the first chapter about stuff you've got in with something instinctual is something that we do without knowing why we do it. It's an act of unfreedom. And when we become knowing doers, we know why we are doing things, then we can become free doers.
And why is that? You know, why that's really important what you're saying. Why what's the functional reality that's going on there? If we know our own action, we know the motive for our own action. And I think is it in the first chapter where he talks about motive and driving force?
Yes.
Characterological disposition or
Right.
characterological organization. Yeah.
Yeah. We're participating. It's transparent to us because we are creating a reality in ourselves. This goes also to the last chapter of Riddles of Philosophy when he's talking about the provisional self, that we're creating a form that's transparent to us how it was brought about, which is the way all of creation works. When and intuitive thinking is the participation in that creation, not just for me. I would
word intuition. Sorry, go on, Jeff.
Based on that, just to extend that, go out on a limb again, because apparently I like to do that. I would suggest that intuition is what is universally human, as a universally human experience, mutually perceivable, making that universality perceivable in glimpses, say. Because the other thing about intuition is it's firing. It's thinking is I can grab a hold of my thinking and I can really work with, and it's a beautiful process to do so. And as Stuart so beautifully said, you don't remember your thinking. You in the pedestrian sense of remembering, you're growing the thinking into its next iteration, say.
Good. Thank you.
And that growing is a creative process that but intuition are those flashes of absolutely comprehensive knowing. So here's an example that often have brought really great novelists say they wrote the novel in a flash of intuition. They might not use the term intuition, but that's what they're saying. The whole novel was complete, and then everything else was just a meeting out the details of it, figuring out the best ways to. So then there's intuitions then inside the larger intuition, which are sort of little microcosmic intuitions that connect, and then the whole thing as a thought organism is brought into creation, say.
No, one of the problems there. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
What was that?
I was going to say one of the problems there, of course, is that you could create a coherent story built around a bias. That's not, a premise. That's not. We need more than coherent. Well, we talk about, some people talk about theories of truth. You need coherence is part of it, but you need more than coherence.
This goes to your description of values in relationship to all of this, and to me, if you're really participating in what's true, good, and beautiful, say, and we can unpack those three words until the cows come home. What is good is going to be what is of the highest harmonic quality with reality, say. right? And so that the value comes out of that. You don't go in with the value, a conviction that you know what is right, because the other thing about intuition is that it's meeting the full moment, the full reality of the moment, without characterological disposition mediating. The problem with von Hartmann and all of the psychologists that have ever lived, as far as I'm concerned, is that characterological predisposition is a subjective fact that absolutely skews everything we think and say, and there's no way around it because it comes out of what? The unconscious, right? And intuition is, here's the other description, right? He says, intuition is the spiritual, something like consciousness of the spiritual, of that which is spiritual with a spiritual activity or something like that. That it is not mediated.
It's an unmediated experience
of the spiritual. And so that's what people are calling the unconscious. And it's what the great, way overlooked, Georg Kuhlewind. You know that guy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He calls that, instead of the unconscious, we should be thinking in terms of the supra consciousness, because that's what we're at, rooted in with our intuition.
I have to add there, there's so many interesting things you picked up on here, Jeff. Two reflections. One going all the way back to like the intuition that creates a whole work of art, and I was reminded of the word harmony that you used, brought in there. The importance of harmonic structures in medieval poetry and previous poetry and structure there's something where they're intimately connected, which I find interesting. But then you dropped an even bigger bomb when you started talking about characterological disposition, because another word for what you're describing is just karma. It's like it's the character that we have created for ourselves so that we experience the things that we need to do, the things that we need to experience, the things that we planned to experience to help us grow spiritually whilst we're down here on Earth. I've got an idea. A quick summary of either of what we think we've learned today, or where we're going to take our thinking after the end of this conversation, because it's been really fruitful for me, and I want to express that, so like hopefully in a few clear words. And do you think does that sound like an okay way of rounding out this? Who wants to go first? I'll go first because I know what I really there are two things that you particularly that you've picked up on, Jeff, and that's been amplified by things that Stuart have said. Whilst I was clearer about what my own personal idea of intuition was, you've helped me grow that considerably by adding in the volitional element that's involved there, and the importance of the observation of thinking to discover that in there. And the other one that the other key point that came up for me is the usefulness of this phrase that I've seen 1,000 times, but perception is to observation as thinking is to intuition. But then we were able to grow that a little bit, make it perhaps even more accessible with hearing versus listening, and looking versus seeing. It's like this active participatory nature that is involved there. I'm not claiming it's like I understand intuition completely, but I definitely feel like it's grown an extra dimension just through this last hour of talking. So Really appreciative to both you guys.
Yeah, I feel feel the same way. I'm much clearer on one of the deepest, mysterious questions you could ask about what it is essentially to be a human being. I think is what we're saying. Intuition is the grasping of and the being of what it is to be essentially human, and the Christ mystery is wrapped right up in it, like the dreamless sleep is equatable to the 3 days in the underworld, say. And intuition, this transformed touch, is why laying on hands can heal. Right. So touch is the absolute most opaque sense we have, because it gives us nothing except that everything is other than me. and to get into the everything other as if it were a unified reality, that also speaks to me what intuition is. And I'll just, this isn't a summary, but I wanted to share just a picture. A dear friend of mine is a Waldorf teacher here, and she and I go for a walk every week, and she shared that the ways in which children are changing, we often talk about that, and the rapidity of that change that's happening. And the teachers are scientists at the forefront of the evolution of consciousness as it's being in part affected by many of the things of modern society, say. And she was sharing that this goes. I thought about this when you were talking about harmonics. She was sharing that in the 6th grade class, that like the physics of sound. They're studying acoustics, I guess. Of course, in a Waldorf school, it's not going to be sound waves and the typical materialistic nonsense. And so the music teacher is there during the teaching because they integrate the two. I mean, why would you do that? Have a phenomenological experience.
Yeah. Wow.
So they noted that in years past, they would play a certain, I don't know that much about music, but certain interval, and they would ask the class if it was harmonic, and 100% would say yes. Well, this time they're now dissenters, and this has been increasing because when you play something discordant, they'll say that's harmonic. So there's a picture, right, to me, of the way in which reality is changing, and the way in which only intuition can meet that change in order to respond to it in the proper way. But it also is there's a symptom there of that children are getting used to discordance as a new normal, so to speak. And I don't know how much we accept that, because I don't have an intuition of that at the moment. I need to do some meditation on that. But I thought that was a beautiful picture of reality, and so I was inspired by your description and your summary.
I'll just add, excuse me, what you guys are saying is you're thinking about things in ways that I don't necessarily think about in detail. So I'll stick to where I'm coming from at the moment. I expect to get a lot more out of this when I re-listen to it. So I'm quoting from that guy Alan Howard, that I think it's consistent with Steiner, so I think it's okay. And there is quote, and there is an even higher stage, which he calls intuition. Obviously, I'm starting in the middle. No more need or can be said of that than that it approximates to what the knowledge of another human being becomes when it rises to the highest level of communion of one with the other. When, as we sometimes say, the two become one, but without losing their individual identities. And the reason I find that, let me just add for the heck of it, one word for it on that level is love. And there's no other word for it on the higher level either. But in calling it love, we raise love itself to a level which cannot be described, but only experienced. Okay. I guess what it seems to me that's perfectly consistent with Steiner. Steiner could have said something like that. And if so, it suggests to me, so even in the higher worlds, where presumably at the very least, greater communion is to be expected and developed and so forth and experienced, even though apparently we're supposed to work on that right here on Mother Earth. But there we can have a more direct experience between births. We still have to maintain our individuality. We're still maintaining our individuality. The communion isn't emergence, it seems to me. It's maybe even interpenetration. Well, not entirely inaccurate, but it's not emergence. We still maintain our own individuality. And it seems to me that's a worthy question. Well, what does that mean? What constitutes my individuality? If I'm not to lose myself, I'm not to become you. I'm not, and that raises questions about people who like to talk about becoming one with the great I am, which I think there's a lot to that. But if we're not going to lose our individuality, there must be something about us that is indeed unique. If there isn't something about each of us that's absolutely unique, then what happens to our individuality, and how do we understand that uniqueness? That's I have others, but that's a question.
I wasn't intending to have the last word, and I hope this isn't the last word, but if it is, it is. But there's a wonderful saying of Steiner, which is that humanity is the religion of the gods.
Right.
We are mysterious things. We are mysterious things to them as well. So there's no surprise there that we're having trouble understanding ourselves. Okay, guys. Unless anybody wants to add something, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I hope we do this again sometime.
I hope so too.
I'll press the end of recording and we'll